Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to 360DX webinars. I'm Julia Caro, Managing Editor at GenomeWeb, and I'll be your moderator today. The title of today's webinar is IVDR in light of the COVID pandemic, the near future of in vitro diagnostic testing. This webinar is sponsored by LGC Biosearch Technologies. Our speaker today is Eric Vollebrecht, a founding partner at Axon Lawyers in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. You may type in a question at any time during the webinar, and you can do this through the Q&A panel, which appears on the right side of your webinar presentation. And we will ask our speaker your questions after his presentation has concluded. Also, if you look at the bottom tray of your window, you will find a series of widgets that you can use to enhance your webinar experience. So with that, let me turn it over to Eric. Please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Julia, and good morning, good afternoon, depending on the place where you are. As you can see behind me in Amsterdam, it is good end of the afternoon, almost good evening. We're in daylight saving time, so that means it's dark early. And I am going to take you through an introduction to the new European in vitro diagnostics regulation, as well as some COVID-19 aspects of current European IVD regulation. And I will also address some Brexit, Swixit, Turksit aspects, and then I will do all of that in under an hour, so there is some time for Q&A, which is, I might leave out some breathing spaces here and there, so if I'm talking too fast or my accent plays up, then just let Julia know and she'll set me straight. So let's dive right into this. Oh yeah, just about me. As Julia said, I'm a lawyer. I'm based in Amsterdam. I work for quite a lot of the big medtech companies, a lot of the big US ones as well, also big IVD companies, and I've been helping quite a lot of companies make sense of first the medical devices regulation, the MDR, the sister regulation of the IVD regulation. We are also doing quite a lot of work on the IVD regulation. So I would dare you to ask me a question I can't answer. That would be interesting. I'm also known for my bad humor, so I will go right into that with some cheesy memes on the agenda. This is what we're going to discuss. And just to take the Chuck Norris meme, if you are not working on this already, you might also already be too late. That is actually quite an important one to understand. A lot of people may think like, 2022, that is far away, 2024, that's even further away, so why on earth am I even devoting any attention to this? One of my goals with this webinar is to make sure that you understand that this is actually it's quite close. It's closer than you think. Also, a lot of what the IVDR is about is set in stone by now, even though not all of the guidance has been developed yet. Basically, the regulation, so the whole framework and the basic regulation that has been in force since May 2017 already, which is by now more than 3 years. So that means that if you haven't been doing anything, you've been wasting quite a lot of the transitional period, actually. And that is also how the authorities and notified bodies over here see it. If you start looking at this only now, then there's basically no excuse for it. An important point about the about the IVDR is that the IVDR does not grandfather any devices currently on the market. This is something that we had with the MDR and are also having with the IVDR. The IVDR is going to require that all IVDs currently on the market, CE marked, are reassessed and get a new conformity assessment under the new IVD regulation, which also means a new CE mark, because they need new technical documentation. You might even need a completely new quality system, and these are things that cost a lot of time, and you need budget for it. That's something that I see a lot of companies misunderstand, that this is really, it's a completely new game. CE marking logic doesn't really change that much in the basis, but it doesn't mean that you need to do a completely new conformity assessment application. And further on in the in this webinar, it will become clear why this is such a big thing. So it means that if you don't do a new CE marking under the IVD regulation sooner or later, depending on how you are working with the transitional regime, it means that basically you can't be on the market with your current product anymore. So this is a big thing. Why is the IVDR such a big game changer for IVDs, or you might even say a quantum leap? Well, because if you look at it, currently under the IVD directive, about 10 to 15% of the IVDs currently require notified body review, so third-party review, and about 85 to 90% are self-certified. What is going to happen under the IVDR is that this system is going to basically be flipped. So that means that the large majority requires notified body review. And the large minority doesn't do that. Actually, this is still a conservative estimate, 15 to 20%, because there are also estimates that say it's actually less, it's 10 to 15%. So anyway, it means that you have a good chance as a US company that has been self-certifying their IVDs for the IVD directive as of now, that you are going to need a notified body for the very first time for the European market. And that, if you are thinking about that only now, is going to be a problem, because there aren't that many notified bodies already admitted to do IVDR conformity assessment. And as you can see underneath in the slide, the IVDR brings because so many devices need a notified body for the first time, a 780% workload increase for notified bodies. So for US purposes, imagine that you have the FDA, and the FDA is just chugging along at normal capacity, and suddenly there's this huge bulb in the pipeline coming that increases workload by 780%. How would that work for the FDA? Okay, that's the perspective that you need. In such a situation, is it helpful to be first or to be last? Well, this is probably a question that you can answer for yourself. Another important point with the IVDR is that in 2018, the General Data Protection Regulation came into force in Europe, which combines with the IVDR to form, you could say, a storm of storms for the IVD industry. Because what you need for the IVDR is that you need a lot more data for your new CE marking, for your new conformity assessment application. For IVDs, that is often obtained from secondary use of samples, and the IVDR makes an explicit link with European data protection legislation, and actually says if you are going to do secondary use of samples, you must do this in accordance with the GDPR. That means that if you have a performance study or a performance assessment that is going to rely on secondary use of samples, because this is a legal criterion, that's actually Article 57, Section 3 of the IVDR, your notified body may ask, can you please demonstrate how you did this in a GDPR compliant way? If you cannot, the notified body will say, oh, that's too bad, we are going to refuse your data, because you're not allowed to do it in a GDPR non-compliant way. And if you can't demonstrate it, we will refuse your data. So that is a really big problem. And because it's such a big problem for so many companies, I've added quite a large amount of bonus slides about the GDPR specifically for the IVDR industry, as you can see in my cheesy Archer meme. If you don't watch this series, you are missing out on a lot. It's just fantastic. So that's also my tip for you today. Watch more Archer. It really helps you to relativate lots of issues going on. Keeping up the pace, this is the transition regime for the IVDR, which is always important to explain. As I said, if you go all the way back to the left, 26 May 2017, the IVDR already entered into force, more than 3 years ago, 3.5 years almost ago. The IVDR entered into force. So since then, it was actually possible to actually start talking to notified bodies, starting to get your IVDR house in order. Then there are some deadlines, and actually they gave this quite long transitional period of 5 years until 26 May 2020, because they thought, these poor IVD people, they will be meeting notified bodies for the first time, they need a long transitional period. So what happens then? By 26 May 2022, the IVDR becomes applicable, and then there is a 2 years transitional period, 26 May 2022 to 25 May 2024, under which, if you currently have a notified body certificate for an IVD, you can still be on the market, which is valid past 26 May 2020. You can still be on the market until the expiry of the certificate. So let's say, for example, you've got a list A or list B IVD or a self-testing IVD, because these are the IVDs that under the IVD directive you need a notified body CE certificate for. Those can still be on the market in this grace period. All the other IVDs, so all the currently self-certified IVDs, for those IVDs, 26 May 2022 is a hard stop, is a brick wall. If you don't have your IVDR certification by then, you are going to be, well, not able to be on the market anymore, even if your device was on the market lawfully before that time under the IVD directive. So this is why this is so important. It is because there is no grandfathering. Then after 25 May 2024, for all the devices that have been placed on the market lawfully before 25 May 2024, there is still 1 year of sell-off period for those devices. So that is 26 May 2024 until 27 May 2025. So all the devices still in the supply chain during this year can be sold. If they are still in the supply chain by 27 May 2025, they also have to be discarded because they can't be sold anymore. That is the transitional regime. So is there a lot new under the IVDR? Yes, there is. I apologize for this slide being a bit of a, let's say, eyesight test, but I wanted to show you the entire slide anyway, because it's so useful, and to also show you what components of the IVDR are new compared to the IVD directive. And what you should know about this slide, it's a very, very super helpful flowchart, basically, of how to apply and work with the IVDR. You can download it for free from the website of MedTech Europe. And if you just Google IVDR flowchart MedTech Europe, then you will immediately get to the website of MedTech Europe where you can download this as an A1 sized PDF. So ginormous. If you have a big ass plotter in your company, then you can plot it for yourself on an A1 format, stick it on your wall, and have lots of fun with going through all these nice diagrams. Because what is new? The blue part is about the obligations of manufacturers. That contains some new impactful things. For example, an obligation for manufacturers to have sufficient coverage, which may be insurance, for product liability, which is something that your notified body will audit you on. It also contains quite a lot of new elements on which I call the systems, plans, and other schemes area, because the IVDR asks for a way more systematic approach. So, for example, you need a system for risk management, as it's called. You need a system for post-market surveillance, and all of that is specialized, specified further. Like, for example, the red part is the place where post-market surveillance and vigilance is explained, which also explains or contains references to your post-market surveillance system. Other new impactful things are a lot of other new quality system elements. And that is one of the remarks I immediately want to make. If you are currently a self-certified IVD company and you go to the MDR, there is an enormously steep uphill learning experience in terms of quality system for you. The IVD directive is very light on quality system requirements, whereas the IVDR is very heavy on quality system requirements. So you need to be prepared, regardless of the class of your device, anything that needs to go under the IVDR, even if it's a Class A self-certified general lab instrument, needs to be subjected to an ISO 13485-2016, and then some extra requirements in the MDR quality system. So be prepared. That is no small feat. Then there is the orange part is about design requirements. There are a number of new design requirements, like, for example, on devices that run software, a bit on chemical substances as well. Then on this, the purple part is basically where quite a lot of the impactful stuff for IVD companies happens, because this is about performance data. And the IVDR, for the MDR, there was this acronym. The MDR is basically an acronym for more data, really. I was never able, as a non-native speaker, to come up with a similarly good abbreviation that the IVDR would be. But basically, I settled on insanely, vastly more data, really, because there's so much more data that you need to collect to, and also need to collect in specific ways to support your IVD. Collecting that kind of data takes time, so that means that if you need to collect data before May 2022, counting back, also need to go through conformity assessment application, which usually takes a bit shy of a year, and then still need to do trials for that. Then you can understand that if you haven't been starting this process, you're already on the late side. The light blue part is about conformity assessment procedures. There are a lot of new procedures because the IVDR has a new classification system. They copied the GHDF ABCD risk classification system and then remodeled the whole conformity assessment application system based on that, and also included some new stuff, like, for example, a specific conformity assessment route for companion diagnostics. That's also new. New then is on the bottom left corner is the economic operator regime, which is a supply chain regulation, basically. It means that your importers and distributors in the union also have a role to play in the IVDR and also have their own autonomous legal obligations. It means that you also need to map out who of these entities that you have in Europe that are part of your supply chain fulfill a specific role, because what you think is a distributor might actually be an importer. Importers have different responsibilities than distributors, like, for example, also put their name on the label of your IVD. So there's a lot happening there and that you need to understand. The light green stuff all the way on the right bottom corner is UDI. Well, fortunately, if you come from the US, you know how to do UDI by now, or you should. We are going to do the same in Europe, except we are going to do it slightly differently, because why the hell not? So this is also something you need to come to grips with how UDI is going to apply for your device. And then the red part is all post-market stuff, which is also a lot more detailed than under the IVDR. Post-market is interesting in the sense that you need to do post-market performance follow-up, so you need to have a very active program for engaging with end users and distributors to collect data from them about real-world performance of your device, which is also new. So a lot of new stuff. Let's not hang around here too long. This slide, if you're interested, you can download it from the MedTech Europe website, and I really recommend that you do because it's a fantastic document. I've got it pinned on my wall here behind my monitor to actually also for reference. So you need to do a gap assessment to determine what am I missing. Where am I coming from? Where am I going? So that means that you need to go to your management, ask for money, and also make sure that you impress on your management that this is actually, it's a big project that your European market depends on, because, like I said, no grandfathering. Quality system, I've said, first encounter of a notified body, I've said, but all important. Like I said, don't underestimate it because it's a really critical project to your presence on the EU market. If you screw it up, if you don't finish in time, no devices for you on the European market. And that's really as bad as it gets. We are nearing the date of application of the MDR for MDR devices. And I can tell you, I've got quite a lot of exasperated clients that misunderstood, underestimated, under-resourced, and so on this project, and are now suffering the dire consequences of it. So what is new? Basically, I've said all these things. UDAMET I haven't said, which is interesting because UDAMET is a database of databases, if you will, that all the devices will be registered in, and which has a connection with UDI. UDAMET will actually start to be functional for actors. So that would be the economic operators that need to register in UDAMET as of 1 December this year for the medical devices regulation already. So that means that as a company, you can already start to play and understand UDAMET from actually next month. And I would recommend that you do because there's a lot to understand about UDAMET. It's a complex thing. A lot of definitions have changed, and that is important because definitions are actually, they define things. And because they define things, they also define how the IVDR works. Like, for example, companion diagnostic has been defined for the first time. Almost like the FDA definition, but not quite. So don't think that if you know the FDA definition for a companion diagnostic, that the European one is identical. We have a definition for a near patient test, which is impactful because there is a specific conformity assessment, additional element in conformity assessment for near patient testing, for example, which is why these definitions matter. Quality system I've mentioned. There are new provisions on claims and advertising, which are important. Also, some new quality system elements like the need for a person responsible for regulatory compliance that also needs to have certain qualifications that you need to have both at the manufacturer and at the authorized representative. So if you're a company with their own authorized representative in Europe, then you need a person responsible for regulatory compliance, both at the manufacturer and at the authorized representative. Your authorized representative is quite heavily regulated under the IVDR and also jointly and severally product liable with the manufacturer, which if you have an independent authorized representative will explain some of their weird behavior in the coming times. These I have all mentioned. Yep, just for sake of time, I'll keep up the pace a bit. Parts and components, I've specifically been asked to address that, so we'll talk about that a bit more later in the presentation. UNAMED, just mentioning it again because it's so hugely important. In-house produced devices, I will also talk about that in more detail. What I'd like to say at this point is that there is a specific regime for so-called lab-developed tests under the IVDR. And depending on where you go in Europe, hospitals or labs depend on their own internally developed tests more or less. But in my country, the Netherlands, for example, there are university hospitals that actually make 80% of their own diagnostics for their labs, which is quite a lot. And they are hit really heavily by this new regime because it means such a lot for them. Economic operators, this is the part out of the flowchart that I just showed you. So authorized representatives, importers, and distributors have new obligations. This is how they relate, and this is how this applies. So regulated are the manufacturer, the importer, and the distributor, and they have different roles. So the manufacturer can either be based in the EU or not, as you may know, or in the Union, I should rather say. When the manufacturer is based in the Union, they place their own devices on the market. When the manufacturer is located outside the Union, it's the importer that places the devices on the market for regulatory purposes. Keep this in mind because you might also have an importer for customs purposes, and you might even have a distributor that actually physically imports the products that you call distributor, but who is actually an importer under the MDR. Why is this relevant? Because there is actually quite a lot happening in that regard. Because your importer, for example, has to verify part of your compliance as a manufacturer and keep records of that. They must be able to show that to the supervisory authorities for IVDs. Distributors have to check what the importer does. So you've got your self-checking, let's say, system, which was copied from the pharmaceutical supply chain controls. And that is quite a novelty for medical devices and IVDs. This means that probably this will impact your distribution agreements with distributors in the EU, because I will bet your bottom dollar that this is not accounted for in your distribution agreement. I have never seen a US manufacturer so far, and again, you are welcome to amaze me by being different, that actually had this accounted for correctly in their distribution agreements already. So this requires work. It requires revision of your distribution agreements, for example, by making sure that how are you going to cooperate with your importer on doing this. Another important point is that your distributor has an obligation to keep a register of complaints, and you as a manufacturer have an obligation to your notified body to set up post-market surveillance that has access to the complaints register of the distributor. So this is, for example, a quality system element that you do not often see accounted for in distribution agreements. So this is just one example. So this is a hypothetical example where we've got a manufacturer, that's the little ISO factory sign on the left, imports into Europe, and how this works. So what you need to do is you need to make this kind of mapping for your supply chain so you understand what is what, so you can also know who needs to do what in this regard and what to account for in what agreement. And surprise, surprise, you know who is going to audit these agreements? Yes, your notified body. Actually, notified bodies are being trained up and are hiring in-house lawyers at the moment to understand agreements better. I'm actually one of the nasty people that is also training notified bodies to understand these distribution agreements better. So that has the advantage that I sort of know what notified bodies are looking for, but they really want to see a more cooperative model that especially gives you access to any real world data that your distributors and importers will have in the supply chain. So that's very important to account for in the distribution agreements. And again, I usually do not see them being set up in that way. Usually it's just push boxes straight down the supply chain and never hear anything from them except if it's a complaint. But like I said, this is a bit too simplistic under the new regime. So this is something I've already said something about, but the concept of placing on the market is important to understand because that helps you map the supply chain. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into a lot of detail on this, but make sure that you understand what placing on the market is. Placing on the market is not necessarily having it at your 3PL in Europe that puts it in a custom bonded warehouse, for example. Basically, it means when the device is really available to the European market. So let's say, for example, hypothetical example, you have a big warehouse in Europe where you put all your IVDs that can go to the rest of the world in there. Because US companies often work with, we have US, we have rest of world. And as long as your devices that are sitting in the warehouse, even if they are labeled for the EU, if they are not earmarked as this goes to the Union, then they are not placed on the market, which is a problem because that can get you in trouble with regulatory deadlines, for example. So make sure that you understand these things. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into a lot of detail. But for example, if you go to my blog, medicaldeviceslegal.com, or to my SlideShare, there's a lot of presentations on how to do this. Also, if your company is a RAPS, Regulatory Affairs Professional Society member, there are a lot of good sessions in RAPS that you can view on this subject, actually. So you've got a lot of challenges. Like I've said, economic operators is quality system item. What is placing on the market? How am I going to work with importer labeling? How am I going to work with my PRC that I need? The IVDR says that the importer has to verify certain items. How are they doing that? How should they do it? If maybe you have your own subsidiary in Europe that is going to do this, how can they be set to verify? How can you pool resources if you have your own corporate umbrella that contains the manufacturer and the importer and maybe a distributor in Europe? Then there are ways that you can actually pool regulatory resources. I've written a very detailed article on that for Regulatory Affairs Journal. where that you can find that was published in last year, 2019. How are you going to deal with third parties that turn out to be importers? Like, for example, you have a 3PL that applies final labeling to your product, then suddenly they become a regulated importer probably. So there's quite a lot that you need to understand. So that takes us to the clinical evidence collection. Like I've hinted at already, a lot more detail under the IVDR. Under the IVDD, so the IVD directive, your clinical evidence needed to be based on scientific validity and analytical performance. Now the IVDR is also going to ask for clinical performance data. If your current technical documentation does not contain data on clinical performance, then you have homework. So you need to also get your clinical evidence, and you need to, for example, from performance studies, and you also need a performance evaluation plan to underpin all of that. So what we've seen with the MDR in terms of clinical evaluation, the same methodology now applies to the IVDR, and it's very, very strict. So there's a steep learning curve there. If you are in a company that also sells general medical devices and has already gone or is going through medical devices regulation, MDR, for Europe at the moment, talk to your clinical people there about how they do clinical evaluation under the MDR, because performance evaluation under the IVDR is basically the same methodology, but I can assure you that for the IVD part of the company, it will be completely new. So make sure that you access these resources if available. Also, what the IVDR requires is much more of a life cycle approach to the way you work with clinical data. So post-market performance follow-up, PMPF. Clinical evidence, again, one, I would say, MedTech Europe nugget, if you will. They wrote a fantastic ebook, which is also free to download on clinical evidence requirements under the IVDR. The best favor you can do yourself is download this document. I've read it a couple of times, and it has a very good Q&A in it. It has a very good explanation of how to do this clinical evidence collection and performance evaluation under the IVD regulation. So this is really going to help you understand a lot more about what is actually required. And the good part is this was written by MedTech Europe members themselves, so by basically your competitors. So it gives you a really nice crowdsourcing experience of the best that the brightest and the ones ahead of the pack actually know about this. What you can also do is there is a commission staff working document, and that's the COVID-19 part of this webinar on current performance of COVID-19 test methods and devices proposed performance criteria, dated 16 April of this year. And that has some annexes and the document is very specific on how to do data collection, how to do performance evaluation against the current standards that they want to see in Europe. So also that is a very interesting document. It's COVID-19 test focused, but it gives you a really good view of what do they like to see in terms of data and performance evaluation at the moment in Europe. So that's also a nice one to download. Notified bodies, as you can see, it's going to get less and less. With more and more. Well, why? Because there is this enormous bottleneck. This is a snippet from the database of the European Union with notified bodies for the IVDR. And currently it has 4. The red line covers BSI UK. Why? Because we have a Brexit at the end of the year, which means that BSI UK as a notified body will cease to exist for European purposes. It's not a valid European notified body anymore. Fortunately, BSI has a notified body in the Netherlands as well, with basically the same capacity, because these two share the same quality system and the same back office, but still it's one notified body less. So that means that at this moment, only 3 notified bodies are have been notified for the IVDR yet. And pop quiz, how many notified bodies do you think are currently notified for the IVD directive with almost no IVDs that need to be conformity assessed by notified bodies? Okay, drum roll, 21. So that means that there's actually 18 more notified bodies under the old directive with much less to do. So if you have to explain bottleneck, then this is how you explain bottleneck. Yep. So what we can see, this is the most recent state of the process. So we have 15 IVDR notified bodies that actually applied for a notified body designation under the IVDR, which is 15 out of the current 21. And out of these 15, only 3 or 4, but later on 3, are actually in the business of being able to accept your conformity assessment application. So maybe this gives you a bit more of a urgency perspective on why it is so necessary to be first in the queue rather than last in the queue. So I announced that we are going to talk a bit about lab-developed tests under the IVDR, which was a specific request from the organization. So we've got Article 5, Section 5 of the IVDR that says, hey, health institutions, also a defined term under the IVDR, by the way. Not everybody is a health institution. So look at that definition. The definition is quite broad, so it might even be that commercial testing labs are also considered health institutions for the purposes of the IVDR. That gives them extra options, but also limited options, because they'll be covered by the other obligations for health institutions under the IVDR. Well, so when can you rely on this lab-developed tests exception? Because it's an exemption. Basically, what it allows is internal use in the health institution without a CE mark. Fantastic. But there is a constraint. You cannot transfer the device to another legal entity. So as a hospital, for example, let's say you are a hospital system of, I don't know, 4 hospitals operating under the same name, you cannot produce for other hospitals in your same group, which is a bit of a problem at the moment. And the authorities here and there have said that they are going to interpret this restriction very strictly. Then also, in order to be able to do lab-developed tests, and this is one that is actually the most problematic criterion in the bunch, is that you need to demonstrate as a health institution that the specific needs of your target patient groups for which you want to develop a specific diagnostic cannot be met at the appropriate level of performance by an equivalent device available on the market. So that's, so if there is, paraphrasing that, if there's a CE marked alternative available at the time, you need to either argue why you are different, or you need to buy the CE marked alternative. And this was for the European hospitals was a really big shocker, because they thought, hey, can't we determine this for ourselves? Well, you can provide the reasoning for yourself, but this is basically a kind of an exemption that is, it's a bit like the named patient exemption in the Medicinal Products Directive, but then it's a targeted patient group exemption, if you will. But you need to justify it. And also, you need to only justify it at the start, but you need to justify it permanently during the life cycle of your lab-developed test. So that means, as a hospital, if you invest in a lab-developed test that is later being CE marked by somebody else, or somebody else makes an equivalent test, then you have to stop using your LDT. So if you are a company that supplies to health institutions technology for inclusion in in-house tests or homebrews, as they're also called, then it is crucial that you understand all of this. So we've got 10 minutes left, so let's keep up the pace. Why is this also an issue? What you see is that CE mark test manufacturers, and that is a bit more on the background, which is crucial to understand if you're a company in providing technology in this market. So let's say you're selling RUO, IVD technology to hospitals, then this is for you. What we will see is that CE mark test manufacturers, they are going to face a struggle to be CE marked under the IVDR. But that means that the problem is that if you have a commercial test that cannot be on the market just because they're late with their CE marking in the IVDR, yes, you can develop a lab-developed test alternative, but immediately when they get their CE mark, you have to stop making the lab-developed test, which means that it might be interesting to cooperate, for example. So you might, so health institutions or companies selling technology for RUO could actually find some really nice, new, interesting ways to cooperate. And you also have the problem that your customer might be in a really big pickle because for the LDT regime, there is actually not a transitional regime. So that means on the date of application, 2022, end of May, it means that all the in-house installed base at the moment needs to be vectored into this new system. And that is an enormous exercise for these hospitals. So also there, if you are helping them, if you supply that kind of technology, it might be that you can find a nice way to actually help the hospital do its own validation for the LDT regime, because hospitals basically need to do a kind of CE marking light, as I've put on this slide. Because, for example, they need to have manufacturing and design information. Big spoiler, most hospitals are really shit at developing that kind of documentation. You can help them out a lot that way. They need to do supplier qualification, things like that, because they need a production quality system. Hospitals have no idea how to set up a decent production quality system. It's hard enough for manufacturers, but for hospitals, I can tell you from my own experience, hospitals will just say, hey, but we have an ISO 15189 certified lab quality system. Yes, indeed, that means that you are proficient at running tests. But it doesn't mean that you are proficient at building your own tests. For that, you need a production quality system, something else, not the same. So that is also something that, that hospitals have difficulties understanding. And actually, in order to do LDTs under the IVDR, one of the requirements is that a hospital has to have an ISO 15189 certified lab quality system, but it's not the only quality system they need. They actually need to run two, a quality system for the lab and a quality system for the production, which is quite a step up for many hospitals. And as a company selling technology, you might find all kinds of nice, interesting options for business there. Components and parts then, there is a new regime in the IVDR in Article 20 that concerns replacement parts. It's a two-pronged regime. It concerns replacement parts that, sorry for the typo, do not change performance or risk profile of the IVD. So they are really like the normal replacement parts, which may be OEM or which may be gray market. And there are replacement parts that actually do change the performance or risk or intended purpose of a device. And the difference is that for the parts that are basically pure replacement parts, they replace the same functionality without changing anything otherwise. Well, there's a hard requirement now that they must not adversely affect the safety and performance of the device. If they are replacement parts, that's what they're supposed to do. But even then, if you have a supplier, or if you are a supplier that sells replacement parts, you need to there needs to be supporting evidence available for the European authorities. That is an obligation on the party, both the party supplying and the party using the replacement parts. So it's a general obligation addressed to everybody. And that means that normally it'll be your customer's problem. And as it goes with customers, the customer will make it your problem. Because they will say, hey, but you are selling this to me, I need validation data. So if you are selling parts intended to be specifically included in IVDs, then you need to go look for validation of non-original part of components. So you need to build up data for that. Very important. If you have a replacement part that does extra things, so it changes the intended purpose, then your part is regulated as a device in its own right. Congratulations. The part needs to be CE marked as an IVD under the IVD regulation. So this is another regulatory category of, let's say, accessory-like medical devices, but then being replacement parts that extend performance of the device. And this is a big problem in a market where, let's say, you're in lab instrumentation, where you develop new parts that do not only replace existing functionality, but also add additional functionality. This is critical for you to understand. What you should also understand is that that the manufacturer of the instrument or the IVD has a lot more options to prescribe requirements for preventative maintenance under the IVDR. The IVDR says that the CE marking is valid on condition of proper maintenance as specified by the manufacturer. And the manufacturer has a lot of obligations on how to do this. But also this means that he can make it really difficult for the aftermarket, for other parties than the OEM to provide these devices. And that's something, if you're in that kind of market, you should be aware of. So for COVID-19 specifically, there are no specific IVDR derogations or measures yet. There is a recommendation of the European Commission that says, hey, member states, maybe you want to be lenient on the national exemptions that you can apply, but there is no European mechanism in force yet. There is a mechanism in the IVDR that allows to roll out national exemptions to a European level, but unlike they have done for the medical devices regulation, where they have made it possible to actually apply this to medical devices that are not yet MDD certified, this is not possible for the IVDR yet. So that is a problem. Things need to get worse before they will allow that. Will the IVDR be postponed? That's also a question I get a lot because of COVID-19. No, they will not postpone it. If you ask any competent authority, they will say, no, it's not going to happen. Another problem is for IVDR conformity assessment is remote audits, because currently it's not allowed to have an initial audit done remotely. And that is a problem, because if you can't do an initial audit remotely, you need an auditor to show up physically on your site. Hey, and didn't the COVID-19 epidemic make this really, really difficult? Well, that's a problem. There is MDCG guidance on how to work with this under the IVDD, so the IVD directive. Also there, it says no remote audits for initial approval. It says I don't even apply to the IVDR, but the principles may apply by analogy. So that is something that you might want to look at. Keeping up the pace, exits. If you are a company that has any business in or running through the UK, Switzerland, or Turkey, then you need to understand what this is about, because there is a Brexit. Brexit is finally happening. Actually, the UK has formally already left the Union. But there is no deal for what happens afterwards. So you need to understand, you need to really follow the political developments there. Same with Switzerland. Switzerland is a bit different. It might be that political developments there will not allow Switzerland to implement the IVDR timely. So that means that it might be that they are late with that. Turkey, same thing as well. There also, it might be that they will not implement the IVDR timely. So we're going to skip, to the final slides. So work on your data. Make sure that you keep track of the of all the guidance that still comes out. Make sure that you work with UNIMED. Don't enter into any long-term obligations that you might not be able to meet, and make plans B for all of these situations. So that's the end. There are quite a lot of IVDR GDPR slides at the end, also with corny memes, but I hope we maybe have time for a few tiny questions if I didn't overrun too much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric. As a reminder, if you have a question, please type it in the Q&A panel. And let me just tell our attendees to take a brief moment after the webinar has ended to take our exit survey and provide us with your feedback. So with that, let's get into the Q&A. So we had a number of questions about the lack of notified bodies. Maybe you can comment on that a little bit. When do you expect more notified bodies to come online, and might the IVDR be postponed due to the shortage of notified bodies?
Last question, no. First question, we have 11 in the pipeline. And if you look at the slide I showed from the European Commission, that document, that is part of a presentation that also shows a bit about the pipeline for notified bodies. And what you see is that with the IVDR, there are quite a lot of notified bodies still stuck at the stage where notified bodies need to remedy the non-conformities of the first audits. So actually, it's also a bit, the ball is a bit in the court of the notified bodies to do better than they initially did. And it also means that if you are currently already talking to a notified body that says, yes, we will definitely be IVDR accredited at some point, count your fingers. Because if the notified body strings you along, is then notified too late to complete your conformity assessment before the date of application of the IVDR, it is your problem, not theirs. So it means that you need to be very careful in evaluating whether you stay with the notified body that is currently not notified. now is a moment that you can still change, even though, of course, the capacity of all the notified bodies that are notified already is limited. Still, consider it if you don't trust your notified body to complete the process in time. If you're with a Turkish notified body, then definitely change notified bodies, because these are not even being considered for IVDR notification at this moment.
Okay, thanks. I'm afraid this is actually all the time we have for questions. We had a lot of questions, but I hope that someone will be able to answer them online after the webinar. So with that, let me thank our speaker, Eric Vollebrecht, and our sponsor, LGC Biosearch Technologies. As a reminder, look out for the survey after you log out to provide us with your feedback. And if you missed any part of this webinar or you would like to listen to it again, a link to an archived version will be emailed to all attendees. So with that, thank you very much for attending this 360DX webinar.